Well, hey everybody. It is very late on a Tuesday night. I think it's Tuesday night. I don't know anymore. Are you having this problem? I can't even remember what day it is anymore now that we're all quarantined and everything is shut down. But I thought I would give you a garage update because a couple things have been happening around here. And there is big news on the Volkswagen front, which some of you are so good at Volkswagen engines that you already know what I did. But we'll get back to that in a minute. First, I kind of wanted to show you a few things that have happened. And I'll start with this. The Audi A4. I've had this car for 10 years, and it recently spent the longest time it has spent off the road in a very long time. I try to keep it active. I try to keep it maintained. As some of you might laugh if you knew me in college, because I didn't think I knew the word maintenance until I was about 24. But this car, believe it or not, has sat outside most of its life. And yet it looks, I think, really good. It's got original paint. I got these wheels about a year ago. It took me about 10 years to buy wheels for this car, but it finally happened. And lately I had to do a bunch of air hoses, radiator itself, temperature sensors, that sort of thing. But now she's running and driving great. And I'm honestly on the fence about maybe take this out on the road for a little while. I think maybe when winter comes, this would be the perfect car to go out in. I always eat like the spiciest food before doing these. I don't know why I feel the need to do that. It took me a very long time to get this roof rack on. You may have seen it in the back of shot a few times, but I've had it for about 2 years, and it took me a very long time to finally come over here and go, okay, I'm gonna learn how to do vinyl, because I wanted to make sure to put clear vinyl anywhere that it touched the car, because again, the paint is in pretty good shape. But not having worked with that before, I was a little timid to work with it. But also I wanted to fix it before I started modifying it. But now I'm hauling bikes around on it. It's a lot of fun. And I've actually been to everywhere on this fairing here. This car has not been to Zion and Moab, but I've been there, so I don't know. Am I a poser? You guys can let me know, I guess. And of course, Motion Pro and an Audi covering up what can only be described as a Kansas State sticker, which in Missouri, it's liable to get your tire slashed by someone in a lifted truck. So, just kidding. But maybe, I don't know. I've seen weird acts of violence against Kansas in Missouri. There used to be this whole border war thing. Anyway, it's ancient history. It's personally like my baby. I don't think I could ever get rid of this car. Of course, I have a problem getting rid of pretty much anything, apparently. I do need to put the mud flaps on. I got some mud flaps off of Auto Anything, just generic mud flaps. I also got a skid plate, which is not generic and is actually very substantial. It's over behind the Fox. But I do think that would be a really good winter car to vagabond around in. Again, the goal of the whole channel, really, as called Nowhere to Be, is to vagabond around, have a vagabond adventure in one of these cars and sustain it for as long as possible. I've done a lot of research into how to camp in the winter, ways to sustain myself off-grid. And I'd love to do that in this. I'd love to keep this going all winter. Or I could be stubborn and do it in something like this, the 86 Corvette. Last update, I think you guys saw, it was running and driving and it had recently caught on fire. Well, it hasn't moved. I did get the tools laid out in actually somewhat nice order here to work on the Corvette. And I also got the parts laid out for the Corvette. And while this doesn't look like a lot, it's just gaskets and O-rings, it actually implies a lot of work. You have to take off quite a bit of things to get down, especially down to the water pump. And then the intake manifold gaskets, which aren't here. But these are fuel rail O-rings for everything on the fuel rail and injector O-rings. Serpentine belt. This engine has a timing chain, and I really doubt it's been accessed or worked with, but I'm not going to do that yet. I kind of want to get the basics taken care of. And of course, the fire damaged the distributor cap, so we're going to put a new one on. But beyond that, it has sat. I've started it a couple times, but as you can see, it's been sitting for a minute, which I don't like. But when you hoard projects like this, you can expect to not necessarily make progress on all of them unless you have either an ungodly work ethic or a whole bunch of time, or maybe help. Help would be nice. But this is the Audi Fox. It hasn't moved. It's a table. It's a table for stuff that's been on it for months. I haven't done anything with it. This car needs a water pump, and it has always just needed a water pump. It's just been sitting. I have the water pump. It's on the shelf over there. Again, I just haven't gotten to it yet. And that brings me to the Volkswagen corner, where we have the Volkswagens that you're no doubt familiar with, the Vagabond Rabbit, and of course the Lago Blue 1981 diesel, which is what we're here to talk about. And then we have the Fiesta, which we actually made quite a bit of progress since the last video. Took off the ball joints, control arms, tie rods, and I'm currently in the process of putting those back on. Also did a bunch of things in the engine bay, just kind of giving it a once over because it pretty clearly caught on fire at one point. Notice all the soot there. I checked the plugs, they were bad, so we put new plugs in. Just confirmed some of the wiring was intact and some of the wiring wasn't, so I'm kind of working on that. Pulled some of the radiator hoses and we're putting a new thermostat on. Just cleaning house a little bit on this. Which brings me to this corner, the Honda N600. My dad is showing interest in the N600 actually. How often does it happen that a father turns their child on to working on cars? But I think it's a lot rarer that the child turns their father on to working on cars. And I think actually he might be getting the bug. It's been sitting long enough that it's got a spider here. I don't know if you can see that. There he is. Hello, spider. We finally did get the hood popped, and I do want to try to crank it over, but that's for another video. I did tell my dad, I said, I'd love if you took this on. I think it'd be awesome. My one rule, my one condition with you taking on this car, Dad, is that it has to run and drive in this condition. Before you do any body work and paint work, you can do that, that's fine, it's your choice, but I want it to run and drive like this. I mean, look at this. This is fantastic. Where do you get patina like this? It looks phenomenal. I mean, even the power washer lines on the side just somehow add to it. Driving around as it is, maybe polish the chrome a little bit, but just get it running, driving, dependable, nothing done with the paint, and turn heads everywhere you go. That would be my idea of fun. The Volkswagen engine now. I have made a decision, and I will explain why I made this decision, but long story short, I bought a 1.5 diesel. Now you may remember that I sang the high praises of the 1.6 in the last video, and I said some less than ideal things regarding its comparison to the 1.5. Now the 1.6, which came after that in the early 1980s, was largely just better in every way. The 1.5 was just soft. It was not as well constructed as the 1.6. It was actually known, widely known even at the time, to have head issues, head gasket issues, warping on the head, coolant passages that would erode over time. And while all of that is still definitely true, it just came to the point of needing to do something. This car's been sitting for maybe 3 years, so I needed to pull the trigger on something. The next thing that happens, I'm just going to pull the trigger. I'll tell you why I did it. First, I'm going to mount you on the Audi here. Hang on a second. Can you... I don't know what you can and can't see, but I'm going to be confident that you can see me. Yeah, you can probably see the engine too, which is nice. I hope. I don't know. Need like a mirror or something behind the camera. Anyway, I want to say thank you to all of you who chimed in the comments suggesting that I look at the 1.9, also known as the AAZ. This is not an engine I knew a lot about, or at least I didn't until you guys suggested it. For those of you who don't know, the 1.9 turbo diesel was apparently very plentiful in Europe. It was available in a lot of different Volkswagen products, even some that didn't wear the Volkswagen badge. But apparently in North America, it was only available for 6 years in Canada, never in the United States. And that's all based on this one post I was able to find on Volkswagen Vortex. So long story short, I'd have to drive to Canada to get one of these. Anyway, I've come to like it actually. It seems like a really good mix of modern reliability and efficiency with that old school mechanical goodness, you know, because not only is it going to be a more reliable engine, but it's more efficient, the metallurgy is better, it's just going to last longer in general if you take care of it. So there are pretty good reasons to go with a more modern engine. And the mechanical aspect, the fact that it's not controlled by an ECU and 6,000 sensors, I think keeps the originality. Thank you for suggesting that. I think the long-term plan here, no matter what happens with this, is to keep an eye out for a good AAZ, or even one that's in a running car that's been wrecked or something, and maybe go that direction sometime in the future. So the reason I bought this engine was because it was $100. There's really no other way of saying it. I drove all the way to Omaha, Nebraska to buy it, which kind of seems crazy actually to say out loud. A 12-hour round trip. 12 hours of driving. It was actually a 16-hour round trip when it was all said and done. Now, I'm sure some of you probably think that's crazy. I think it's a little crazy. But there are two reasons why I did it. Number one, I like a long drive. You know, there's just something serene and peaceful and zen-like about taking a drive that is so long that you know there's no way to get there quickly. It's an excuse to get to all the things that you've been making excuses for. Like, oh, I'm going to listen to this album, or I'm going to listen to this series of podcasts, or I'm going to watch Adam Savage's podcast outtakes, you know, on YouTube. You think you're going to do all these things, and then days turn into weeks and you don't do them. a long drive is a really nice way to reset. And for me, take the time to do those things that I thought I would do all along. So I welcome the opportunity to take a really long drive. Heck, I drove several hundred miles a day in the Rabbit when I was driving it, and that's what got me here in the first place. So I don't mind driving to Omaha and back. Plus, I've never been to Omaha, so it's an excuse to see a new place. Omaha, come on! Anyway, the other reason I bought this engine is because it was super cheap. It was $100. Now, the full story is that Peter, the seller, works at an air-cooled Volkswagen place in the Omaha area. He is an expert with all things air-cooled, and based on his driveway and his garage, he is also a pretty good expert on everything water-cooled. I particularly love the Volkswagen Fox, the Brazilian-built Fox. I had a really great time talking with him about Foxes in general. As soon as I told him I had an Audi Fox, he thought that was really cool. Then he opened the garage door, and it was just like going home. It was like Valhalla, man. Like, it was just like, oh! You've got a 78 on the right, which is the car that this engine came out of. I don't remember what it is on the left, what year it was, but again, very early Rabbit on the left that he had pretty much, near as makes no difference, fully rebuilt. And man, these things were sharp. They were in great condition. This is the kind of place I could hang out and shoot the shit for like hours and hours and not even notice the time go by. Back when I first started getting serious about putting an engine in this car a few months ago, I put out a bunch of feelers. Anyone who had Volkswagen parts for sale on Facebook in a tri-quad state area of Missouri, several 100-mile radius, I just sent them a message and said, hey, look, you don't happen to have any engines or know anyone who does, or can you put me on a list? Maybe call me or message me when you find an engine. And one of those people came through. So I called Peter and he explained the situation. He said, well, the previous owner claims to have rebuilt the head. I can see that there's a fresh head gasket on there. The valves are unburned. They have never had fuel hit them. Peter's never heard this engine run. And that means I've never heard it run. It means I have no substantive data to confirm that this engine is not a brick. To him, the seller was telling the truth. And to me, Peter's telling the truth, you know. And I explained to Peter, I said, there's going to be no hard feelings, man, if this engine doesn't run, if it's totally grenaded on the inside. Because keep in mind, if I put my engine back together, it would look pretty darn good, but it would be complete toast. So long story short, this engine is a big old fat question mark because I don't know if it runs. The guy who sold it to me doesn't know if it runs, but it's actually in really good shape. It doesn't have any rust on it. Peter put ATF in the fuel pump, which is a really good preventative step. To prevent the fuel pump from congealing or sealing up or the seals drying out. It's got a clutch and flywheel on it. I mean, there are $100 or more worth of parts here. Now, I'm by no means an expert on these engines or pretty much anything at all, but I can say that having done the whole debacle with my 1.5, I do know most of the things to look for in terms of like an outright failure on this engine. So I think the plan is I'm going to go ahead and take the valve cover off, which I'm actually going to do tonight. You're probably right now watching a montage of me taking off the valve cover and looking inside, which actually means you know more than I do at this point. So I hope it's good news. Well, the first thing I can report is that it smells like assembly lube. So I'm not thinking this has been run much, if at all. The cam lobes don't look terribly worn or anything like that. Everything looks as clean as it should be if it was recently rebuilt. I wouldn't say just rebuilt. I mean, it looks a little gunky in here, but also there's some assembly lube right there, and you wouldn't be able to see that after not very many miles. I wonder what all this gunk in here is. Just stuff that's accumulated. We can flush that out, no problem, but I just wonder how all this got in here. I mean, to be fair, this does look like a fairly recent rebuild, especially when you look at the valves. If you see the valves in there, they look like they've got no miles on them. Look perfectly clean. Intake and exhaust. There you go. And plus, there's your shiny new head gasket. But there is some oil on the outside here in a couple places, so it's leaked at some point. Looks like it might be leaking a little oil. Oh well. Obviously the engine mount is shot, but mine aren't any better. Also, someone's been in here because this is an aftermarket oil pressure gauge sender. So somebody installed an oil pressure gauge on their car, had to put the sender on here. That did not come from the factory, so somebody's done something with this at some point. I can say I don't think it's been run. I just think that gunk got in there somehow. which worries me. When I rebuild an engine, I try, again, not an expert, but I try to keep it as clean as humanly possible. I try to keep even my own hairs from getting in there. And actually, you can see a hair on this engine right here. There's a hair sticking off right there. I don't know if you can see this. Maybe if I backlight it. See that right there? Hair. That would drive me nuts if I was rebuilding this engine. This thing would be spotless before I put the valve cover on. It wouldn't have all this gunk down here in the lands and stuff. I don't know what all that is, but I think I should try to get rid of it before we fire this thing. Also, this baffle is not a stock component. You have to add this in. This is something that was in later cars, so somebody's been in there. I will give it that. I just don't know much more until we take the head off, and I think that's going to be for another video. All right, back to me in talking head mode over there. So I think it'd be a good idea to take the head off, at least inspect, the surface of the block, see if it was machined, see if it needs to be machined. Check out the firing rings, check out the tops of the cylinder bores and see if they have a lip. Just kind of do the basic things without being too intrusive. Maybe even pop the oil pan off and check out a bearing or two and just see how they look. I've already got a set of ARP head studs for a 1.5, which I have no other use for at all because I hadn't expected to buy a 1.5 and I don't think I ever will again. So with all that said, where we stand right now is that engine is a big question mark. There's a 50% chance that it could run as soon as we put it in the car and has great compression and it runs and drives, or even has decent compression and we get 5,000-10,000 miles out of it. But there's also a 50% chance in my mind that it's a total dud, that it's got, exploded ring lands, that it's got a whole bunch of issues. As soon as we take the head off, something glares at us and says, no, I'm not going to run at all. That's a possibility too. Now, if it does run, if it is a good engine, that car's back on the road. It's done. For $100, I will have gotten this car a new heart and gotten it back on the road. There are a couple little things we need to do, but by and large, the day that engine goes in the car, it could be running and driving and I don't have to worry about it for a while. That's pretty darn cool. So really, I guess we might as well just flip a coin. Heads it runs, tails it doesn't. See you next time.